When war erupts, it raises urgent questions. Why did it start, and who stands to gain? The world watches in shock and confusion, searching for answers amid the chaos. Every headline, every image, and every statement from leaders adds to the uncertainty, making it difficult to separate fact from propaganda. But behind the headlines, the numbers tell a story of their own, a story of staggering loss, economic upheaval, and a humanitarian crisis that deepens with every passing day. The Israel-Hamas conflict, ignited by the October 7, 2023 attack, has brought immense suffering and global attention. In the first weeks alone, over 1,200 Israelis were killed, with more than 240 people kidnapped and taken into Gaza. As of early 2024, Palestinian casualties have soared to over 30,000 dead and more than 70,000 injured, according to humanitarian organizations. These numbers are not just statistics, they represent families torn apart, communities shattered, and futures stolen. Thousands remain missing, with the fate of many still unknown. The number of displaced people in Gaza has reached over 1.7 million, nearly 80% of the population, forced from their homes by relentless bombardment and ground operations. The world's eyes are fixed on the region, as the violence escalates and the humanitarian crisis deepens. The devastation is not just physical, but emotional and psychological, affecting millions both near and far. The destruction is visible everywhere. Entire neighborhoods in Gaza reduced to rubble, hospitals overwhelmed, and basic infrastructure, water, electricity, sanitation, crippled or destroyed. The cost of rebuilding Gaza's infrastructure is estimated at over $18 billion, a figure that grows daily as the conflict continues. Israel's military spending has surged, with estimates of daily operational costs reaching $250 million. By the end of 2023, Israel's additional war-related expenditures had surpassed $20 billion, straining the national budget and prompting emergency economic measures. The psychological toll is immeasurable, with trauma, anxiety, and grief affecting every generation. As the violence drags on, we must ask, who benefits from this destruction? Who profits from the pain, and who is left to pick up the pieces? The answers are rarely simple and often hidden beneath layers of political maneuvering and historical grievances. The cost is staggering. Israel's military spending surged by billions, with estimates of daily operational costs reaching $250 million. Gaza's infrastructure losses are estimated at over $18 billion, crippling hospitals, schools, and homes. Crime rates have spiked dramatically in the wake of the conflict. In Gaza, reports of looting, kidnappings, and black market activity have increased by over 40% compared to pre-war levels. Human trafficking and smuggling networks have expanded, exploiting the breakdown of order and the desperation of displaced families. In Israel, police have reported a 30% rise in property crimes and a surge in hate crimes and vigilante violence as fear and uncertainty grip communities. Understanding these interests reveals the motivations behind the conflict and why peace remains elusive. Analysts and diplomats debate possible solutions, but the underlying interests often outweigh the calls for peace. The economic toll is immense. Israel's GDP growth has slowed from 6.5% in 2022 to under 2% in 2023. With unemployment rising and consumer confidence plummeting, Gaza's economy has nearly collapsed, with unemployment exceeding 70% and most businesses shuttered. Billions in international aid are pledged, but much is diverted or delayed, and only a fraction reaches those in need. The cost of humanitarian relief alone is estimated at over $2 billion, yet aid convoys are frequently blocked or targeted. For some, war is a tool for power or profit. For others, it's a means to achieve political goals. The motivations are as varied as the actors involved, from governments to militant groups, each pursuing their own vision for the future. Defense industries and arms dealers have seen profits soar, with billions in new contracts signed since the conflict began. The stock prices of major defense contractors in the US, Israel, and Europe have risen by 15 to 30% since October 2023, reflecting a surge in demand for weapons, surveillance technology, and military equipment. Meanwhile, local black markets thrive on the chaos, trafficking everything from food and medicine to weapons and fuel. By examining the roles of Iran, Russia, China, and groups like Hamas, we can see how the conflict serves their agendas. Each player brings their own interests and strategies, turning a local crisis into a global chessboard. Iran has increased its support for proxy groups, funneling millions in weapons and funding to Hamas and Hezbollah. Russia and China used the conflict to challenge Western influence, offering diplomatic cover and economic incentives to regional actors. These maneuvers complicate peace efforts and ensure that the conflict's impact is felt far beyond the borders of Israel and Gaza. This isn't about taking sides, but about understanding the web of interests that keeps the war going. Only by untangling these connections can we hope to see the bigger picture and move toward lasting solutions. The fate of the missing and kidnapped remains a painful reminder of the human cost. As of early 2024, over 240 Israelis and foreign nationals remain unaccounted for, believed to be held in Gaza. In the chaos, hundreds of Palestinians are also missing, their families left in agonizing uncertainty. The International Committee of the Red Cross has documented over 1,000 new cases of missing persons since the conflict began. The conflict has shifted global alliances and drawn in world powers, making a regional crisis into an international one. Decisions made in distant capitals now have direct consequences for those living in the conflict zone. Humanitarian organizations struggle to keep up, with aid deliveries often blocked or delayed. The United Nations estimates that less than 30% of requested humanitarian aid has reached Gaza since October 2023, leaving millions without adequate food, water, or medical care. The US is deeply involved, while others watch, calculating their own interests. Every nation's response is shaped by its own priorities, alliances, and fears about what the future may hold. U.S. military aid to Israel has exceeded $14 billion since October 2023, fueling debates over accountability and impact. Congressional hearings have revealed concerns about oversight, with some aid packages delayed or restructured in response to public pressure and international scrutiny. We'll break down who gains, who loses, and why peace is so difficult, especially for the civilians caught in the middle. Their stories are often overshadowed by politics, but they are the ones who bear the heaviest burden. Hospitals are overwhelmed, with bed occupancy rates exceeding 200% in Gaza and medical staff working around the clock. Basic supplies, food, water, medicine are running out, and international agencies warn of impending famine and disease outbreaks. Short-term victories can lead to long-term disasters. What may seem like a win today can sow the seeds for future conflict and suffering. The trauma of loss, injury, and displacement will echo for generations. In Gaza, over 12,000 children are estimated to have been killed or injured, and entire generations face a future marked by trauma and deprivation. In Israel, the psychological scars of rocket attacks, kidnappings, and loss are deep and lasting. Only by understanding these dynamics, and the staggering human and economic costs, can we grasp the true cost of this war. Perhaps by facing these realities, we can find a path toward a more peaceful future. The numbers are sobering, but behind every statistic is a human story, a reminder that the true price of war is always paid by the innocent. If you found this video insightful, please like and subscribe to support our channel. We want to hear your thoughts. Comment below and let us know your perspective on the Israel-Hamas conflict. Your voice matters, and together, we can foster a deeper understanding of these complex issues. To truly understand the roots and ongoing nature of the conflict, we must first take a closer look at Hamas. Its origins, its ideology, its actions, and the devastating impact these have had on both Palestinians and Israelis. Hamas is a group officially designated as a terrorist organization by much of the world, including the United States, the European Union, and many other countries. This designation is not just a label, it reflects the group's long history of violence, attacks on civilians, and refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist. According to the U.S. State Department, Hamas has been responsible for thousands of deaths since its founding in 1987. At its core, Hamas's ideology is rooted in Muslim extremism. The group's charter openly calls for the destruction of Israel and the creation of an Islamic state in its place. This uncompromising stance has fueled decades of conflict and suffering, with over 35,000 Palestinians and more than 1,400 Israelis killed in various escalations since 2008. In Gaza, Hamas rules not as a government focused on the well-being of its people, but as a militant force. It diverts resources to build weapons and underground tunnels, often at the expense of jobs, education, and healthcare for ordinary Gazans. According to the Israeli Ministry of Defense, Hamas has spent an estimated $1.25 billion on tunnel construction and weapons since 2007, while unemployment in Gaza remains above 45%, and over 80% of the population relies on humanitarian aid. The October 7th attack was a shocking and deliberate act of terror. Over 1,200 Israeli civilians were killed, more than 3,000 were injured, and at least 250 people, including children and the elderly, were kidnapped and taken into Gaza. The brutality of this attack sent shockwaves around the world and deepened the cycle of violence. Hamas's strategy relies on violence against civilians, launching over 30,000 rockets since 2001, carrying out attacks and spreading fear to achieve its political goals. This approach has brought immense suffering to innocent people on both sides, with thousands of Israelis injured and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians wounded or displaced. Its actions have led to Gaza's isolation, making any hope for peace nearly impossible. The devastation affects not only Israelis, but also countless Palestinian families who are caught in the crossfire. According to the United Nations, over 2 million Gazans have been affected by repeated conflicts, with more than 70,000 homes destroyed or severely damaged since 2014. Negotiating with a group that openly denies Israel's right to exist and refuses to renounce violence has proven futile, stalling any progress toward a lasting solution. Crime and lawlessness have also increased in Gaza, with reports of arbitrary arrests, torture, and extrajudicial killings by Hamas's internal security forces. Even many Arab nations have distanced themselves from Hamas, refusing to engage with its leadership. This leaves Gaza trapped in a relentless cycle of violence and political isolation, with over 10,000 people reported missing or unaccounted for during major escalations. The group's ongoing brutality and hardline tactics remain a major obstacle to any hope for peace, fueling anger and despair on both sides of the border. The economic cost of the conflict is staggering, with billions lost in infrastructure, productivity, and humanitarian needs. Ultimately, Hamas's warlike ambitions and refusal to compromise have only deepened the suffering of those it claims to represent. Ordinary Palestinians bear the heaviest burden. Over 1.7 million are internally displaced, and more than 60% of children in Gaza show signs of severe trauma. The endless conflict continues to claim lives, destroy futures, and leave thousands missing, injured, or grieving. The healthcare system in Gaza is on the brink of collapse, with hospitals overwhelmed by the sheer number of injured civilians. Medical supplies are scarce, and the ongoing blockade has made it nearly impossible to bring in the necessary aid. According to the World Health Organization, over 50% of essential medicines are out of stock, and the number of healthcare workers has dwindled due to the constant threat of violence. Crime rates in Gaza have surged, with reports of theft, assault, and even murder becoming increasingly common. The lack of effective governance and the focus on militant activities have left ordinary citizens vulnerable to lawlessness. According to local reports, the crime rate has increased by over 30% in the past decade, further destabilizing the region. The number of missing persons continues to rise, with families desperately searching for their loved ones amidst the chaos. Over 10,000 people are reported missing or unaccounted for, adding to the anguish and uncertainty faced by countless families. Community gatherings and posters of missing persons are a common sight, as people cling to the hope of finding their relatives. International aid organizations are working tirelessly to provide relief, but the scale of the crisis is overwhelming. Humanitarian workers face immense challenges, from restricted access to the constant threat of violence. Despite these efforts, the needs far exceed the available resources, leaving many without the help they desperately need. Amidst the devastation, the resilience of the Palestinian people shines through. Children play amidst the ruins, makeshift schools provide some semblance of normalcy, and communities come together to support one another. However, the long-term impact on the younger generation is profound, with many children growing up knowing only conflict and hardship. The economic impact of the conflict is staggering. Businesses are shuttered, unemployment is rampant, and the blockade has crippled Gaza's economy. According to the World Bank, Gaza's GDP has shrunk by over 50% in the past decade, and the unemployment rate is one of the highest in the world. The economic despair only adds to the cycle of violence and instability. Despite numerous international efforts to broker peace, the path to a lasting solution remains elusive. Diplomatic efforts have been stymied by the intransigence of Hamas and the complex geopolitical landscape. The international community continues to call for a ceasefire and a return to negotiations, but the road ahead is fraught with challenges. Memorials for the victims of the conflict are a poignant reminder of the human cost of this ongoing strife. Candlelight vigils and moments of silence are held in both Gaza and Israel, As people mourn the loss of loved ones and hope for a future free from violence, the collective grief underscores the urgent need for a resolution to this devastating conflict. Despite its uncertain future, Hamas achieved several short-term goals with the October 7th attack. The assault was a calculated move to draw global attention back to the Palestinian plight, which had been overshadowed by other geopolitical issues. The attack itself was unprecedented in scale and brutality. Over 1,200 Israelis were killed, including civilians, and more than 240 people were kidnapped and taken into Gaza. Thousands more were injured or reported missing in the immediate aftermath. According to Israeli police and emergency services, the number of missing persons in the first week after the attack exceeded 1,500, with hundreds of families desperately searching for loved ones. Hospitals in Israel reported treating over 3,500 injured, straining emergency resources and prompting a nationwide mobilization of medical staff and volunteers. The assault forced the world to refocus on the Palestinian issue, disrupting Israel's growing ties with Arab states. This disruption was a significant blow to Israel's diplomatic efforts, which had been making strides in normalizing relations with its neighbors. In the days following the attack, crime rates in the region spiked. Israeli police reported a 40% increase in property crimes and looting in border communities, while Gaza saw a surge in abductions and retaliatory violence. The United Nations documented over 200 incidents of civilian abductions and at least 50 cases of extrajudicial killings in the first month alone. Emergency hotlines were overwhelmed, with call volumes tripling as families reported missing relatives and sought information about the kidnapped. For some Palestinians, Hamas's actions boosted its image as the only group willing to fight for their cause, making the Palestinian Authority look weak. This perception shift has led to increased support for Hamas among younger Palestinians who feel disillusioned with the status quo. In Gaza, the number of casualties soared. By the end of 2023, over 30,000 Palestinians had been killed, with more than 70,000 injured and thousands still missing under the rubble or unaccounted for. The Ministry of Health in Gaza reported that over 60% of the casualties were women and children. Social media became flooded with posts about missing persons, and local NGOs estimated that at least 8,000 people remained unaccounted for months after the initial strikes. The capture of hostages gave Hamas leverage, allowing it to demand prisoner exchanges and prolong the conflict. This tactic has historically been used to negotiate the release of Palestinian prisoners, further solidifying Hamas's role as a key player in the resistance. In 2023 alone, over 100 hostages were released in exchange for more than 300 Palestinian prisoners, but dozens remain unaccounted for. The International Committee of the Red Cross reported that negotiations for the remaining hostages were hampered by ongoing violence, and families of the kidnapped staged protests demanding more action from both sides. These gains, however, came at a terrible cost. Israel's response devastated Gaza, killing tens of thousands and destroying Hamas's ability to govern. The infrastructure damage has left many without homes, and the humanitarian crisis has deepened. The economic toll is staggering. Estimates suggest over $10 billion in damages to Gaza's infrastructure, with unemployment soaring above 50% and basic services collapsing. According to the World Bank, over 60% of Gaza's water and sanitation facilities were destroyed, and more than 500,000 people were left homeless. Aid convoys faced repeated delays at border crossings, with less than 20% of requested humanitarian supplies reaching their destinations in the first 3 months. The group's leadership is hunted, and its future is in doubt. Many leaders have gone into hiding, and the constant threat of Israeli military action looms large over Gaza. Israeli operations have targeted dozens of high-ranking Hamas officials, with at least 30 reported killed or missing by the end of 2023. The Israeli military released maps of extensive tunnel networks, claiming to have destroyed over 400 tunnels used for smuggling and military operations. The cost of these operations, according to Israeli defense sources, exceeded $2 billion in the first 6 months alone. Analysts call this a Pyrrhic victory, short-term attention and prestige, but at the price of near-total destruction. The term Pyrrhic victory underscores the hollow nature of these gains, as the long-term consequences are dire. The sheer scale of casualties and destruction has left both sides reeling, with the civilian population bearing the brunt. Data from humanitarian organizations show that over 70% of Gaza's schools and hospitals were damaged or destroyed, and the cost of rebuilding is projected to exceed $15 billion over the next decade. Hamas may have won a battle for headlines, but it risks losing everything in the long run. The international community's focus on Gaza is fleeting, and the underlying issues remain unresolved. Despite over $5 billion pledged in humanitarian aid by the end of 2023, only a fraction has reached Gaza due to ongoing hostilities and border closures. The United Nations reported that less than 30% of pledged aid was actually delivered, with many shipments blocked or delayed for weeks. The suffering inflicted on Gaza far outweighs any fleeting political gain. The humanitarian toll is immense, with countless lives disrupted and a generation growing up amidst violence and instability. Hospitals are overwhelmed, with over 70% of the injured being women and children, and medical supplies running dangerously low. The World Health Organization reported that more than 60% of Gaza's hospitals were non-operational by the end of 2023, and over 12,000 children required urgent medical evacuation, most of which could not be carried out due to border restrictions. In the end, these victories have left Palestinians more isolated and desperate than ever. The cycle of violence has only deepened the despair and hopelessness felt by many. Over 1.7 million people, nearly 80% of Gaza's population, have been displaced, with thousands still searching for missing family members. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, reported that more than 400,000 people were living in overcrowded shelters, and at least 10,000 families had no access to clean water or electricity. The cycle of violence continues, with no real path to peace. The future remains uncertain, and the prospects for a lasting resolution seem more distant than ever. As the numbers of dead, injured, and missing continue to rise, the human and economic costs of this conflict only grow more staggering. The total spending on military operations by both sides is estimated to have exceeded $7 billion in 2023 alone, while the cost in human suffering is incalculable. Iran emerges as one of the most significant strategic winners in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. While not directly involved on the battlefield, Iran's influence and maneuvering have allowed it to reap substantial geopolitical rewards. By backing Hamas, Iran is able to fight Israel indirectly, projecting its power and positioning itself as the defender of the Palestinian cause. Iran's support is extensive. Estimates suggest it has funneled over $100 million annually to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, providing not just funding, but also advanced weaponry, intelligence, and military training. This backing has enabled Hamas to sustain its operations and escalate the conflict, further destabilizing the region. One of Iran's most significant victories has been the disruption of normalization talks between Israel and key Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia. The Abraham Accords, which had already brought Israel closer to the UAE and Bahrain, were poised to expand. The breakdown of these talks has cost the region billions in potential investments and security cooperation. For example, analysts estimate that a Saudi-Israeli deal could have unlocked over $45 billion in new trade and infrastructure projects, now indefinitely postponed. Iran's so-called Axis of Resistance, which includes Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, has demonstrated its ability to pressure Israel from multiple fronts. These groups, receiving an estimated $700 million annually from Iran, have launched attacks and opened new fronts, stretching Israeli military resources thin. The result is a region-wide escalation, with violence spilling into Lebanon, Syria, and the Red Sea. The war has cemented Iran's role as a regional power broker and a direct adversary to Israel. Iranian officials have used the conflict to rally domestic support and strengthen alliances with proxy groups. However, the human cost of these strategic gains is staggering. Since October 2023, the conflict has resulted in over 1,200 Israeli deaths, and more than 30,000 Palestinian fatalities, according to international monitors. The number of injured is even higher. Over 70,000 people have suffered wounds ranging from minor to life-altering. The chaos has left thousands missing or unaccounted for, with the International Committee of the Red Cross reporting over 2,000 missing persons in Gaza alone. During the initial Hamas attack, more than 250 people were kidnapped, including civilians and foreign nationals. Many remain in captivity, with negotiations for their release ongoing and often unsuccessful. The economic toll is immense. Israel's war spending has surpassed $50 billion, straining its economy and diverting resources from social programs. In Gaza, infrastructure losses are estimated at over $18 billion, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The United Nations reports that over 60% of Gaza's housing stock has been damaged or destroyed, and basic services like water, electricity, and healthcare are on the brink of collapse. The breakdown of law and order has led to a surge in crime. In Gaza, looting and violence have become widespread as desperate civilians search for food and supplies. Human rights organizations have documented a sharp increase in theft, assaults, and even vigilante justice. In Israel, police report a 30% rise in property crimes and civil unrest since the war began, as communities grapple with fear and uncertainty. Iran's gains are real, but they are also precarious. A single miscalculation, whether a direct confrontation with Israel or a misstep by one of its proxies, could trigger a wider regional war, with catastrophic consequences not just for Iran but for the entire Middle East. The Israel-Hamas war has unleashed a cascade of consequences that extend far beyond the immediate region. While the devastation is most acute in Gaza and Israel, the conflict's shockwaves have created new opportunities for distant powers, most notably Russia and China, who are poised to benefit from the turmoil. For Russia, the war is a strategic windfall. As the US and Europe scramble to address the crisis in the Middle East, their focus and resources are diverted from Ukraine. Since October 2023, Western military aid to Ukraine has slowed dramatically. Over $100 billion in military and humanitarian assistance has been redirected or delayed, with the US alone increasing its Middle East spending by 40% in the last quarter of 2023. This shift has left Ukrainian forces with dwindling supplies and less international support. The consequences are stark. Western resources are stretched thin, and Ukraine's ability to resist Russian advances is weakened. Meanwhile, the conflict has fueled a surge in regional crime. According to recent reports, incidents of looting, smuggling, and arms trafficking have increased by over 30% in affected areas since the war began. In Gaza and surrounding regions, law enforcement is overwhelmed and criminal networks are exploiting the chaos to expand their operations. Russia has seized the moment to amplify its criticism of the West, positioning itself as a counterweight to US influence. This narrative has found fertile ground in the global South, where anti-Western protests have surged in over 20 countries since the conflict escalated. Russian officials have used international platforms to highlight Western double standards, further eroding US credibility. China, too, is capitalizing on America's distraction. With US attention and military assets shifting toward the Middle East, China has found more room to maneuver in Asia. US naval patrols in the South China Sea have dropped by 15% since the war began, and military deployments in the region have been scaled back to support operations in the Middle East. The diplomatic front tells a similar story. With the US preoccupied, China has ramped up its diplomatic activity in Asia by 20%, forging new partnerships and expanding its influence. Chinese officials have held a record number of meetings with Southeast Asian leaders, positioning China as a stable alternative to the distracted West. China is also leveraging the conflict to present itself as a neutral mediator. By offering to broker peace talks and providing humanitarian aid, China has boosted its global image at minimal cost, while the US faces mounting criticism for its military support of Israel. Both Russia and China are exploiting the instability to justify their own actions at home and abroad. Russian and Chinese leaders have cited the chaos in the Middle East as evidence of Western failure, using it to legitimize crackdowns and assert their own geopolitical strategies. The human cost of the conflict is staggering. As of early 2024, over 30,000 people have been killed, including thousands of children and civilians. More than 70,000 have been injured, many with life-altering wounds. The number of missing or kidnapped exceeds 1,200, with families left in agonizing uncertainty. These figures continue to climb as the violence drags on. The economic impact is equally profound. The global economy has been rattled by the conflict, with energy prices spiking. Oil prices have risen by 18% since October 2023, and stock markets reacting to every escalation. Supply chains, already fragile from previous crises, have suffered further disruptions, driving up costs worldwide. The longer the war continues, the greater the gains for Russia and China. Instability elsewhere allows them to advance their interests with less resistance. But for the people of the region, the cost is measured in lives lost, families torn apart, and a deepening humanitarian crisis. Over 2 million people have been displaced, and international aid organizations warn that the situation is deteriorating rapidly, with food, water, and medical supplies running dangerously low. What do you think about the global impact of the Israel-Hamas conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more in-depth analysis on world events, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. In every war, arms manufacturers profit, and this conflict is no exception. But the scale of spending and the human toll in the Israel-Hamas conflict are staggering, revealing a complex web of financial incentives and devastating consequences. Since October 2023, Israel has spent over $20 billion on military operations and defense procurement. This unprecedented surge in spending has been funneled directly into the coffers of arms manufacturers, both domestic and international, fueling a rapid expansion of the defense sector. American and European defense giants like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and BAE Systems have seen their stock prices surge by over 25% since the conflict began. As governments scramble to replenish depleted arsenals, orders for bombs, missiles, and surveillance technology have skyrocketed, driving record profits for these corporations. The fear of a wider regional war has prompted Middle Eastern countries to increase their military spending by an estimated $10 billion in just a few months. This has created a booming market for arms, with regional powers racing to modernize and expand their military capabilities. U.S. military aid to Israel, over $20 billion, flows directly to these companies, effectively subsidizing the American defense industry. This aid not only supports Israel's military operations, but also ensures a steady stream of revenue for U.S. arms manufacturers. The cycle of government spending and corporate profit is relentless. In 2023 alone, global arms sales reached a record $592 billion, with the Israel-Hamas conflict acting as a catalyst for even greater demand. Defense budgets are ballooning worldwide, and arms manufacturers are reaping the rewards. Arms makers spend over $100 million annually on lobbying in the U.S., shaping policy and pushing for continued conflict. This lobbying effort makes peace harder to achieve, as political leaders are pressured to maintain or increase military spending. For these companies, war is business, and the human cost is often a secondary concern. Since the conflict reignited, over 30,000 people have been killed, more than 70,000 injured, and at least 1,200 reported kidnapped or missing. These numbers are not just statistics. They represent families torn apart, communities destroyed, and futures lost. The longer the violence lasts, the more these companies benefit. Crime rates, including looting and arms smuggling, have also spiked in the region, with reported incidents up by 40% since the start of the war. The proliferation of weapons has made the region more volatile, fueling black markets and empowering criminal networks. This economic engine is a powerful, often overlooked force behind the conflict, one that profits from both the devastation and the chaos left in its wake. As arms manufacturers continue to thrive, the cycle of violence, loss, and instability is perpetuated, with the true cost measured not just in dollars, but in human lives, shattered communities, and a region left in turmoil. The greatest losers in this war are ordinary civilians. On both sides, the human cost is staggering. The numbers tell a story of devastation that statistics alone can barely capture. In Israel, the October 7th attack killed over 1,200 people, injured more than 3,500, and left at least 240 kidnapped or missing. The violence shattered families and traumatized entire communities. Since the conflict began, Israel has seen a 27% increase in reported domestic violence cases and a 15% rise in property crimes as fear and instability ripple through society. The ongoing hostage crisis continues to deepen the pain and fear, with dozens still unaccounted for or held captive. Each missing person is a family in limbo, a community unable to heal. In Gaza, relentless bombing has killed over 30,000 people, injured more than 71,000, and forced nearly 2 million, about 85% of the population, to flee their homes. Entire neighborhoods have been wiped out, with over 60% of housing units damaged or destroyed. People live in makeshift tents, often without clean water, food, or medicine. Over 70% of Gaza's hospitals are damaged or destroyed, and humanitarian aid is critically short. The UN estimates that less than 20% of required aid is reaching those in need. The psychological trauma, especially for children, will last generations. More than half of Gaza's population is under 18, and over 13,000 children have been killed or orphaned. UNICEF reports a 300% increase in cases of severe trauma among children since the conflict began. Both sides now live with constant fear and loss, fueling a cycle of hatred. Crime rates and domestic violence have surged. Israel's domestic violence hotline saw calls double in the months after October 7th, while Gaza police report a 40% increase in theft and violent incidents as social order breaks down. Aid organizations struggle to help, blocked by violence and restrictions. Since October, over $12 billion has been spent on military operations, while less than $1.5 billion has reached humanitarian efforts. The gap leaves millions without basic necessities. Gaza's isolation has worsened, with over 7,000 people still missing or unaccounted for. Many are presumed buried under rubble, and hope for their recovery fades with each passing day. Israelis feel misunderstood and unsafe. Gazans feel abandoned by the world. Public trust in authorities is at an all-time low. Recent polls show only 18% of Israelis and 9% of Gazans have confidence in their leaders' ability to protect them. The war is destroying not just buildings but futures. Economic losses in Gaza are estimated at over $18 billion, with unemployment soaring above 70%. In Israel, border communities face job losses and business closures, deepening the economic toll. Civilians with no say in the conflict pay the highest price, through death, injury, loss and trauma that statistics can barely capture. The numbers are overwhelming: tens of thousands killed, over 75,000 injured, more than 7,000 missing, and at least 240 kidnapped. Behind every statistic is a shattered life, a broken family, and a future stolen by war. Israel's ongoing campaign against Hamas has come at an extraordinary cost, both financially and socially. The military operation has forced Israel to increase its defense budget by over $10 billion, with daily operational costs estimated at $60 million. These expenses include mobilizing over 350,000 reservists, maintaining a prolonged ground presence in Gaza, and replenishing advanced weaponry. The economic impact is severe, with GDP growth projections slashed and unemployment rising as businesses in southern Israel remain shuttered. The October 7th attack was a devastating blow, exposing critical failures in Israeli intelligence and border security. Over 1,200 Israelis were killed, including civilians and security personnel. More than 3,000 were injured, and at least 240 people were kidnapped and taken into Gaza, with dozens still unaccounted for. The psychological trauma has rippled through Israeli society, fueling widespread fear and anger. Political divisions have deepened dramatically. Weekly protests in Tel Aviv and other cities have drawn over 100,000 demonstrators, demanding government accountability. Since the conflict began, crime rates in Israel have surged by 15%, with violent crimes and property offenses both on the rise. The government's response has been criticized as inadequate, further polarizing the public. Israel now faces the immense challenge of managing a devastated Gaza. There is no clear exit strategy, and the cost of reconstruction is estimated to exceed $15 billion. Humanitarian aid is urgently needed, but security concerns complicate its delivery. The ongoing blockade and destruction have left Gaza's economy in ruins, with ripple effects on Israel's own border communities. The war has brought peace negotiations with Arab states to a standstill. Diplomatic efforts that once showed promise have been frozen, and the Palestinian issue has returned to the forefront of regional politics, complicating Israel's relationships with neighbors like Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states. The destruction in Gaza has made normalization with Arab leaders politically impossible. Over 2,000 civilians have been displaced, and humanitarian agencies report that more than 1.5 million Gazans are in urgent need of food, water, and medical care. The crisis has galvanized public opinion across the Arab world, putting pressure on regional governments to distance themselves from Israel. International condemnation has intensified, with the United Nations and human rights organizations documenting alleged war crimes. Over 40 countries have issued statements condemning the violence, and Israel faces growing diplomatic isolation, including calls for arms embargoes and sanctions. Israel's global standing has suffered significantly. Security threat levels remain high, with travel advisories issued by multiple countries. international relations have been strained, and Israel's long-term security outlook is now more uncertain than ever. The conflict has set back hopes for regional peace by years, if not decades. The path forward is fraught with uncertainty, and the human and economic costs continue to mount. In the theater of war, victory is often a mirage, never more so than in the Israel-Hamas conflict, where the staggering costs far outweigh any fleeting gains. The devastation is not just physical, but economic, social, and psychological, leaving deep scars on both sides. While entities like Hamas, Iran, Russia, China, and global arms manufacturers may reap short-term profits, Israel's 2023 defense budget alone soared to over $23 billion, and global arms sales surged by more than 10% in the last quarter of 2023. These financial windfalls are built on immense human suffering. The arms industry, for example, saw a spike in orders for drones, missiles, and surveillance technology, with US and European companies reporting record quarterly revenues. Yet, these profits pale in comparison to the billions spent on reconstruction, humanitarian aid, and the long-term costs of trauma and instability. Since October 2023, the human toll has been catastrophic. Over 1,200 Israelis and more than 30,000 Palestinians have lost their lives. The number of injured exceeds 70,000, with hospitals in Gaza and Israel overwhelmed by casualties. At least 1,000 people remain missing or unaccounted for, their families left in agonizing uncertainty. In the initial Hamas attack, more than 250 Israelis were kidnapped. As of today, dozens are still held hostage, their fate unknown. Civilians on both sides are trapped in a relentless cycle of violence and grief. In Gaza, over 1.7 million people, nearly 80% of the population, have been displaced, forced to flee their homes under constant bombardment. Crime rates have soared. In Gaza, incidents of looting and assaults have increased by over 40% since the breakdown of law and order. While in Israel, reports of theft and property crime in evacuated areas have also risen sharply. The psychological trauma is immeasurable. Children account for nearly half of Gaza's casualties, and mental health crises have reached epidemic levels. In Gaza, over 50,000 children are estimated to require urgent psychological support, while in Israel, trauma centers report a 300% increase in cases since the conflict began. The elderly too face profound loss. Many have seen their homes destroyed multiple times, and entire generations are growing up knowing only war. Politically, the conflict has undone years of fragile progress. International aid spending has ballooned, with over $5 billion pledged for humanitarian relief in Gaza alone. Yet, peace talks have repeatedly collapsed. Since October 2023, at least 4 major negotiation efforts have failed, and trust between parties is at an all-time low. The diplomatic fallout has also strained relations between regional and global powers, complicating future peace efforts. Lasting peace remains elusive. Justice for Palestinians and security for Israelis are both essential, but without addressing the root causes, occupation, blockade, and mutual distrust, the cycle of violence and rising crime will persist. In 2023 alone, over 500 violent incidents were reported in the West Bank, and cross-border attacks have become more frequent. The only true victory would be a peace that ends suffering for all, where families are reunited, the missing are found, and children can grow up without fear. This would require not just ceasefires but comprehensive solutions addressing security, justice, and economic opportunity for both peoples. The fleeting benefits of war are dwarfed by the prosperity peace could bring. According to World Bank estimates, regional economies could grow by billions annually if peace were achieved, with unemployment dropping and crime rates falling as stability returns. Reconstruction could create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and cross-border trade could flourish. In this conflict, as in so many others, there are no real winners, only loss. Measured in lives cut short, futures destroyed, and the hope for peace slipping further away, the illusion of victory fades, leaving only the urgent need for a just and lasting resolution. Now we want to hear from you. Who do you think benefits most from the Israel-Hamas conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, please like and subscribe for more content like this. While the Israel-Hamas conflict is rooted in regional dynamics, the United States holds a significant, if often understated, stake in its evolution. As Israel's closest ally, America provides more than $3.8 billion annually in military aid, much of it funneled directly to U.S. defense contractors. In the wake of renewed hostilities, American arms giants such as Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman have reported sharp increases in orders for missiles, precision-guided munitions, and advanced defense systems. For example, Raytheon's stock rose nearly 12% in the final quarter of 2023, fueled by demand for Iron Dome interceptors and Patriot missile upgrades. Beyond defense, U.S. technology firms also profit. Companies specializing in surveillance, cybersecurity, and border security, like Palantir Technologies and L3Harris, have secured lucrative contracts with both Israel and U.S. government agencies, providing AI-driven intelligence solutions and facial recognition technologies tested in conflict zones. The war acts as a proving ground, allowing these firms to refine products and market them globally. Energy interests are also at play. With the Eastern Mediterranean emerging as a potential energy hub, U.S. companies like Chevron have expanded their investments in Israeli offshore gas fields. The conflict's disruptions to regional stability often push global energy prices higher, benefiting American producers and traders. Politically, the U.S. leverages its support for Israel to reinforce alliances in the Middle East, countering adversaries like Iran and Russia. The conflict shapes U.S. foreign policy debates, influencing military aid packages, arms sales approvals, and the balance of power in Congress. Domestically, it stirs heated discussion among voters, advocacy groups, and policymakers, with each new escalation reigniting debates on America's role in the region. Yet America's gains are not without cost. Heightened involvement risks entangling the U.S. in broader regional instability while fueling criticism from international partners and human rights organizations. The profits and strategic advantages realized by U.S. companies and policymakers are shadowed by the humanitarian toll and the complex legacy of intervention. Ultimately, America's stake in the Israel-Hamas conflict is multifaceted, measured in dollars, influence, and the enduring challenge of balancing national interests with the pursuit of peace. Like and subscribe to SmartoBrains for more engaging deep dives into breaking news, politics, sociology, economics, and social policy.